You may have the universe, if I may have Italy. Giuseppe Verdi. Apologies for the mispronunciation, but let's move forward. Italy is a nation that needs no introduction. Its contributions to art, cuisine, music, science, technology, industry, civics, engineering, and spirituality are staggering, arguably unmatched. However, it is also a nation mired in lackluster economic performance, corruption, and division, at least by the standards of developed nations. And Italy also has an unusual place in geopolitics, blurring the lines between a great power and a middle power. This video will assess Italy's current power projections, a nation that is simultaneously viewed as both an economic and cultural powerhouse, but also as a kind of sort of washed up political power well past its prime. Let's start off with geography. Most people who pass middle school know that Italy kind of looks like a boot kicking a football, and I guess Sicily is kind of a deflated football. The country has a temperate climate, however is far warmer than its North American counterparts due to the Gulf Stream, bringing in warm waters from the Gulf of Mexico, hence why Milan is fairly nice, as opposed to my hometown of Toronto, which is a frozen hellscape during the wintertime, despite being at similar latitudes. Much of the country is a Mediterranean climate, with warm, dry summers, and by and large is considered very suitable for dense human habitation and agriculture. The northern portion of the country is composed of snow-capped mountains bordering France, Switzerland, Austria, and Slovenia. The mountain range acts as a natural barrier, blocking off enemy forces from the north, and there hasn't been a major concern about this since World War II. Historically, though, it kind of was, and this was an essential asset as a barrier, and hopefully will be in the future. Slightly further south is the Po River Valley, which is a rich fertile land with numerous tributaries connecting Milan, Parma, and other major cities. This is the wealthiest and most industrious part of the country. Northern Italy has been fairly influenced by Germanic culture, which continues to play a disproportionate role in the country's economic, political, and civic system. There's also Venice, which used to be a very geopolitically important city-state, but now is mostly a glorified museum for tourists. Further south lies Florence, the birthplace of the Renaissance, and even further south lies the part of the country where the capital Rome resides. Do I really need to describe what Rome is? It's in the upper half of the country where the bulk of economic innovation and political power comes from. One of Italy's defining features and problems is, after all, the north-south divide. The north is far more wealthy and innovative, while the south is poorer and more agrarian. This makes economic indicators like GDP per capita fairly misleading, as they don't take into account much of the disparity. Northern Italians accuse Southern Italians of being lazy, while Southern Italians accuse Northern Italians of being smug. Kinda reminds me of another country I could name. Southern Italy and the island of Sicily have far warmer climates, which is excellent for farming grapes, olives, and other crops, even though they lag behind the rest of the country in other affairs. There is also one area where the South is the undisputed winner, its diaspora. Most people of Italian descent in nations like the US, Canada, Brazil, and Argentina migrated from the South, and they have had a massive influence on cultures of their receiving nations. Now, I was going to go in depth into the country's history, but then I realized that would probably take a few months to watch, let alone create, and it wouldn't be too relevant to modern geopolitics. So I'll start off with the modern nation-state of Italy. While the written records go back to the Bronze Age, the actual nation of Italy is actually younger than the US. Ever since the Roman Empire collapsed, the peninsula had been broken down into tiny city-states and small territories. Some of these, like Florence, Genoa, Venice, and the Papal States, had their time to shine in the sun. They were far smaller than most other European powers, though. The rise of the printing press and the invasion by Napoleon created a sense of shared Italian identity on the peninsula, and throughout the leadership of Garibaldi, the Pope, and others, the nation eventually unified through a combination of wars and diplomacy. This created a powerful nation, but also political and economic distress, particularly in the South, which was largely run by the mafia. This resulted in a mass exodus to the Americas, hence why Italians make up a plurality in cities like, say, New York City, and the majority of some countries like Argentina. During the early 20th century, Italy waffled on the eve of World War I, looking like it would join the Central Powers with Germany, but ended up deciding to join Britain and France, instead fighting the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was allied with Germany. Around this time, many Italians looked back at their history and compared it with the lackluster nation that they are currently living in. Some saw the empires of Britain and France and wanted some black and brown people to subjugate. You see, the Italian peninsula was once the center of the region when the Mediterranean was a known world, but with the rise of the transoceanic trade, this was no longer the case. Italy became less relevant on the world stage, as it didn't have any oceanic borders, just the Mediterranean. As it saw Britain and France, and eventually the US and Japan, take over from its power rankings. Italy's geography had rendered it a has-been. Mussolini, the quasi-founder of fascism, would eventually take control of the government, suppressing civil liberties, the press, speech, elections, and promoting extreme nationalism and militarism. And later, support the Germans, with the guy most notably known for his tiny mustache. Despite the unease with his racial pseudoscience, which deemed Italians as being not quite Aryan enough. Mussolini wanted to create a new Roman Empire. The country's empire, after all, was tiny, with small colonies in Libya and to a lesser extent the Balkans, so he decided to invade what is now Ethiopia, the last major African power not to be colonized by Europeans. And the Italians lost. It was humiliating, and Italy's performance in World War II would be even more embarrassing, frequently requiring the Germans to save their asses. Italy was eventually defeated by American and Canadian troops, and a democracy was installed. Mussolini was then hung upside down with his mistress by piano wire as various old ladies took turns stabbing their dead corpses. Dead corpses is redundant, isn't it? Please don't demonetize me. Anyway, Italy became a vassal state of the United States during the Cold War. It received American aid from the Marshall Plan, formed a democracy and a social safety net, along with strong trade relations with its neighbors. It joined the US-led military alliance of NATO, along with other European powers, preventing further conflicts in the region and acting as a bulwark against the Soviets. The dominant party were the Christian Democrats, while the Communist Party still gained traction in the background. The Vatican and the CIA cooperated during this time to make sure the communists didn't gain too much power. Italy eventually rebuilt itself, gaining a strong industrial base in the north while the south lagged behind. In 2008 and 2009, the country was hit hard by the Great Recession, and was put under the unflattering acronym the PIGS countries, in relation to those supposedly lazy southern European nations of Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, i.e. PIGS. Let's move on to the economy. Italy has the fourth largest economy on the continent after Germany, France, and Britain. These nations are known as the Big Four, and Italy is the least big of the Big Four, with a reputation that blurs the lines between a middle and great power. The north is a major industrial center focusing on metallurgy, pharmaceuticals, and machinery. This is the region where much of the luxury items are produced. By taking in raw materials from other countries, namely developing countries, and then producing them into high-quality manufacturing goods and shipping them off as Gucci and Prada labels, can make massive profits. Italian brands have a reputation for high quality and craftsmanship, even though it's oftentimes mired in excess consumerism and vapid status projection. Perhaps no other country aside from France benefits from these intangible assets like brand recognition more than Italy does. This brand image has also expanded to the nation as a whole, as the country is one of the top 5 countries for tourism. The tourism industry brings massive sums of money, making sure that those priceless paintings, sculptures, and buildings that were built during the Classical and Renaissance period have produced revenue far beyond what people centuries and millennia prior could have ever dreamed of. To the south, on the other hand, it still remains largely agrarian, with major crops being wheat, tomatoes, grapes, olives, oranges, almonds, and others suited to a Mediterranean climate. Italy's culinary footprint is arguably unmatched, due in part to its large diaspora from the south. However, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Unlike other great powers like the US and Japan, Italy lacks a major high-tech hub, and its economy stifles when it comes to innovation. The Italian economy is fairly anti-competitive and filled with oligopolies that are essentially industries with a small handful of firms that run the show and stifle competition, sometimes even merging into monopolies and cartels. Ever wonder why glasses are so overpriced? Well, it's because nearly all of the lens crafters, sunglass makers, and glasses retailers are run by an Italian company called Luxottica. Ray-Ban sunglasses, which are an icon of Americana, are actually run by Luxottica. Aside from being anti-competitive, the Italian economy is also rife with corruption and nepotism, as are the politics. The country holds a poor track record of fiscal irresponsibility and oftentimes runs on large deficits, acquiring large sums of debt in relation to its GDP. In the past, Italy would solve these problems through monetary policy, oftentimes just by printing more money. This was no longer the case once Italy joined the Eurozone, oftentimes infuriating Germans and other Northern Europeans with their reckless government spending. However, for all of Italy's problems, they never fell into the same shitstorm of Greece, and Italy's reputation as an economic basket case, while having some element of truth, is fairly exaggerated. Moving on to the institution that manages this economy. Italy is a democratic republic, which maintained the same constitution since 1948, since the years following World War II. The government is divided into a legislative, executive, and judicial branch, or branches. While Italy functions pretty well by global standards, the Italian government is pretty notorious in Europe for its corruption and nepotism, as well as the fact that much of its state of affairs have been largely in control of the mafia's trianglehold over Sicily and southern Italy, especially in local governments. Bribes, cheating, and incompetence still take their toll. Italy's government and economy also face another set of challenges, namely their demography. The country has one of the oldest populations in the world. Thankfully, due to the welfare state and the common use of multi-generational households, most of the elderly are well taken care of. However, this will put a major strain on the economy in the future decades later, similar to what is going on in Japan, whereby a small population of working-class adults will essentially have to support a larger population of old people who are not contributing to the production of goods and services. Unlike Japan, though, Italy does not have widespread automation to take care of its elderly, and unlike much of the Anglosphere, they don't bring in as many young immigrants. This will almost likely lead to contraction, unless major technological breakthroughs or large-scale immigration ensues. Now let's move on to the military and foreign affairs. Italy is, by and large, a pretty powerful country when it comes to its armed forces, but they've had a historically lackluster performance. By joining NATO in the aftermath of World War II, Italy placed itself into the American sphere of influence. The US even holds an American air base in the north, and may or may not host nuclear weapons, we don't know for sure. This pretty much ensures that Italy is under the protection of the US and NATO powers. This makes chances of anyone engaging in some sort of conquest of the peninsula very unlikely. Bordering countries like France and Croatia are also part of NATO, and Switzerland and Austria are neutral. In response to this American protection, Italy has been engaged in numerous US-led military engagements like Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as several peacekeeping missions. Thankfully, Europe has endured a long peace so far. Its economic integration through the EU and its military integration through NATO makes war between neighbors very unlikely. Now, some countries like Switzerland are not part of NATO or the EU, but let's keep it real, an invasion by the Swiss just isn't going to happen. While much of Eastern Europe fears Russia, Italy is at a safe distance, which makes it a fairly secure country. So it looks pretty good for now. No one's really fearing the Russian bear, at least no one in Italy at this point. Italy, nonetheless, maintains a fairly rocky relationship with its former colony Libya, and mass illegal migration continues to be a concern. Italy has also had close ties with many other nations in the Americas that have large Italian diasporas, such as Canada, the US, Brazil, and especially Argentina. The diaspora has played a major role in projecting Italian soft power, and I'm pretty sure that every person watching this video is familiar with Italian cuisine on some level, or at the very least a bastardization of it. Overall, Italy has a massive amount of cultural soft power and will continue to have a footprint on the world regardless of whatever abomination Pizza Hut comes up with. But its supposed status as a great power is likely to decline to that of a middle power, as nations like Brazil and India take its place. Some Anglophone nations like Canada and Australia will probably surpass Italy's power projections in the coming decades. This is especially the case with Italy's demographic stagnation and economic mismanagement. But I'm still optimistic about Italy. From the Romans to the Renaissance to the Venice trade networks, this peninsula keeps coming back into the spotlight, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happens again. Thanks for watching.